Om Namo Bhagavate Ramakrishnaya. Salutations to Bhagavan Ramakrishna. My pranams to the senior Swamis, Swami Parameshananda Mataji, Swami Mahayogananda, and ladies and gentlemen, good morning. The topic, as you know, is overcoming alienation. And as society progresses, it seems we are getting more and more alienated from each other. Someone is asking me, what's the topic? Overcoming aliens. So, well, there's nothing to do with the first, or second, or third encounters of any kind, but technically, I am an alien. I am a lawful immigrant, not a US citizen. So when I first saw the immigration forms, I said, oh, I'm an alien. Besides, monasticism itself is a form of alienation. We have voluntarily alienated ourselves from many things. Well, that's a long story. This is not a kind of a new civilizational disease, alienation. We have it following us like a shadow. But in today's world, it has grown into such huge proportions, we are losing the battle on all fronts. Because alienation is on multiple levels. So I'll have a quick look at some of the salient points about alienation, so we can situate ourselves where we actually need. According to the Healthline, the website, alienation is a common yet complex condition. It is both sociological and psychological. It can affect health and aggravate existing medical conditions. Here it is. Well, diagnosis is easy. Just look at the people. And there you see. And if that's not sufficient, talk to the people. Yeah. And if you still cannot pin them down, then see how they behave. And you will find that some way or the other, most of us are alienated. Now, there are the positive and the negative sides also of alienation. But then we will give some solutions according to the Vedantic philosophers and according to Swami Vivekananda also. So what are the general symptoms? Well, work, alienated from work, from family, and friends. That's the general, you can say, understanding of alienation. And work, a few years ago there was a Gallup survey, and it's found that 13% of the Americans love their work. 63% are ambivalent, and 24% hate it. So here we have this kind of, we are alienated from our very work. And then family, yes, 53% for 2019 is the, you can say, statistics, the percentage of divorce rates in the US. Well, the good news is it's going down. And the Europeans are filling in the gap. So a small country like Belgium has 71% of divorces. The divorces due to failures and frustrations and other things like hate. We tend to hate people. Alcoholism and drug abuse is rampant. That's because one thing is we simply can't face ourselves when we are working or in the family or we are alone, whatever. We simply can't. These are due to emotional responses, and it is crushing. So this is, and people go for drugs because, like cocaine, it mimics your neurological structures regarding rewards. You can get a reward without the bother of working for something. You can get the same neurological high. People don't want to grow up. It reminds me of that story of Peter Pan. They don't want to take responsibilities because, as we know, responsibilities entail suffering. Yes, it is rewarding, but then we don't want to face those kind of challenges. In families, we have abuse and domestic violence, which is a kind of what would I say? The main thing in almost all families all over the world. It's not just in America. And domestic violence and, you can say, abuse alienates family members. Parental alienation is one parent will tell the child against the other parent. Generally, it's a form of kind of manipulation. So the mother or the father wants to alienate the child from the other parent. So the other symptoms are, general symptoms are feeling helpless. We generally feel helpless when we are alienated. We don't find any meaning in life, and the world is empty. We feel left out of conversations and people. We want to get in, but somehow it dissuades us. Feeling different or separate from the other people. Having difficulty in approaching other people. Feeling unsafe while interacting with others, etc. Now these symptoms, sometimes they mimic depression and anxiety. In fact, alienation leads one to depression and anxiety and depression leads one to alienation. So we have the symptoms of depression and anxiety as having a poor appetite or overeating, sleeping excessively or suffering from insomnia, lacking self-worth, a feeling of hopelessness. There's a constant feeling of fatigue in the person. Psychological depression, it of course mimics biological underlying structures. In fact, that's the reason why they say that if any area is affected, the whole organism suffers. Abraham Maslow, as you know, in his hierarchy of needs, he mentions that, the basic needs of food and shelter and security, these are needs. You need them. But then he also speaks about love and esteem and self-worth. These are also needs. And when these are not met, one undergoes the process of alienation. So it's a very paradoxical situation in the things that bring us together, security, well-being, also distances us. It's like getting clumped together and getting fragmented together again. So if you are very intelligent, you become isolated. Yes, and you live in your own intellectual glass house or tower. If you are highly talented, you become alienated from the rest of those who are not talented at all. Creativity is a form of isolation and alienation. Poverty, yes, if you're poor, you go out, you become a homeless person. There's no one to look for you, at you, and you're just left for yourself. Even any physical abilities like sports, elite sportsmen, they become kind of isolated, alienated from the rest. So whatever we are doing is bringing us together, at the same time dispersing us away from the others. So social and psychological deprivation, it upsets the body's circadian rhythm. That's the biological clock. And when your circadian rhythm goes out of sorts, your whole day and everything seems so kind of horrible. You're not in sync with anything. Religion, which is supposed to gather us together, in America there are 200 denominations and about 300,000 churches. Sometimes they are competing with each other. So religion is a very powerful, motivating, integrating factor. But when it becomes fanatical, it divides us. And we see that how, on a large scale, it is dividing people. Well, the more, as we say now, the more we develop ourselves, the more we are alienated. Or, similarly, the more you debase yourself, the more you're alienated. You keep on thinking bad thoughts, see what happens. You become alienated from the good, or even from society. You have evil thoughts, even ill health makes you separate from the rest. So it is nothing but a kind of psychological response to the Swami Vivekananda says, the centrifugal and centripetal forces of nature are indeed typical of our universe. So it's called a pravritti, the circling forward, and the nivritti, circling inwards. Both these forces keep the universe alive. They constantly fragment and constantly integrate. This is a mighty processes in nature, and mind also is included in nature. Actually, it is an opportunity for us to redefine ourselves, refine ourselves, and rise to higher and higher levels. But we get stuck in some old rut and say, see, I'm isolated, alienated, and as a result, what? We suffer from all these negative emotions. So metaphysically, an individual is separated from God. We know that. And there's existential and psychological alienation. Existential is like you are separated kind of from the world. And psychological alienation is you are separated from yourself. Now these three levels, as we know, the first is called ontological alienation. It is more like a spiritual alienation. We are alienated spiritually. And the old story in the Bible, the first story rather, that one of the first stories, that yes, Adam and Eve were banished by God from the Garden of Eden. That banishment is a kind of an alienation, alienated from the divine. Before these stories were very popular, of course, but then we had Plato speaking about this universe is a shadow of the real. This is imperfect. The realm of ideas is a perfect realm. So this universe is an alienated form of reality. After that, we had Plotinus, who was also a Neo-Platonist. And he was one of the most influential thinkers there in Alexandria. So he says, everything is an emanation from the supreme good. So we are alienated from the supreme good. So this is a kind of an ontological alienation. And all spiritual alienation can be overcome by spiritual practices. And these spiritual practices are called yogas, the different yogas of karma and bhakti. And yoga is, one of the meaning of yoga is to join. You join your lower self with a higher self. So this overcomes ontological or spiritual alienation. We have, these thoughts were around, but it was George Friedrich Hegel who first looked at alienation from a very philosophical standpoint. He studied this. So he says there is one absolute mind or absolute idea. And it's not a static principle, it's very dynamic. And it is in the process of alienation and de-alienation. It's like kind of a spiral downwards alienation, and the de-alienation is the reverse of the spiral, going up towards a absolute mind, absolute idea. Now this dynamic reality, saying it is there, it is working constantly, and nature is a form of self-alienated reality. And human beings are a form of de-alienated beings going towards the reality, to the absolute. It's wonderful because he says that as long as the individual can manifest knowledge, this knowledge belongs to the absolute mind. That person is integrated, he is de-alienated. If one separates oneself and objectifies the mind, and in mind, in objects or in institutions, what happens is you become de-alienated because you objectify. So his solution is one has to identify oneself with one's subjective mind, which is the conduit of the universal or absolute mind. It's a wonderful analysis, and this was kind of more or less followed by almost all philosophers. And Freud also spoke about it, and mainly it was Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche. He dealt a lot on this form of alienation, how we get alienated. And according to Hegel, of course, this absolute mind, absolute idea works through human beings in the processes of history. And it's not a straight line. It is a dialectical process. As he says, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. That was his great contribution to the world of philosophy. We have this spiritual alienation also spoken about in the Upanishads. In fact, most of the Upanishads speak about the individual soul is separated from the supreme soul and how to join them together. So we have in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, in the Taittiriya and the Isha Upanishad, that supreme soul is symbolized as the sun in the solar orb, the person in the solar orb. And that same entity is here. So meditations are given, it's called a vidyas, how to join yourself with the supreme soul. In the Mundaka Upanishad, we have the illustration of two birds sitting on the same tree, and the lower bird and the higher bird. And the lower bird experiences various good and bad fruits on the tree, and it slowly hops higher and higher and higher, and finally it finds that it was all the time that supreme soul. It was just a kind of a reflection, a dim reflection of the supreme self. We have also in the Kathopanishad, Chaya Tapo Brahma Vido Vadanti. This is what it says, that there are two selves that have entered into this cave of the heart. One is bright and one is a dim shadow. And the whole process of integration is through these Upanishadic teachings. So one has to integrate the shadow self with the real self. So these are some of the ontological, you can say, thoughts about alienation. Then, of course, Advaita Vedanta, it speaks about, it's very clear, there are no differences at all. Neha nanasti kinchana. The nanatva, the differentiation that we see, does not exist. It speaks about one supreme soul. But of course, everybody cannot be Advaitins, because that ideal is, though it's glamorous and so nice to hear, it's extremely difficult to grasp. There's one, and what about me? Who am I? Well, one time a gentleman was speaking to Sri Ramakrishna in Calcutta, and then Sri Ramakrishna, everything is God's will. Yeah, it might be God's will, but it's dead to us. And Sri Ramakrishna looked and said, oh, but who are you? Hey, you are nothing but a self-alienated person thinking yourself separate. If you think yourself as part of God, there you are. But then we had these dualistic and qualified non-dualistic philosophers saying, no, you see, that is not the case with us. So we have the concept of sajatiya, vijatiya, swagata. Vijatiya is, as you said, a mango tree and a coconut tree, two different things altogether. We'll dispense with that. Sajatiya means of a similar class. So one mango tree and another mango tree is the same. And they say that God and the individual souls are of the same nature. And they will always be kind of separate. There is a degree of proximity. There's different degrees of proximities. But dualism says this is actually your reality. You are, yes, one with God, but you are eternally separate. Like the poet Ram Prasad used to sing, I want to taste sugar, I don't want to be sugar. So yeah, it's nice. If you don't end up diabetic, then you can keep on tasting sugar. Of course, it's a crude example, but that's what it is. So if you can understand your divine nature as that of God's divine nature is similar, sajatiya, of a same class, then you're free. You're free from samsara. That's okay. Of course, the bhakti schools, they further go and they say, like, after liberation, what happens? Does the soul always be separate? They give a kind of 4 stages, like salokya, being in the same place with God. And then we have something like nearness, samipya. There are some souls who are a little far away from God, and there are some who are a little close by. Sri Ramakrishna used to make a distinction between his inner circle and his outer circle. Yes, he was for everyone, but he made a clear distinction. This is my inner circle. That's outer circle. And he used to keep quiet when he has to speak something to the inner circle. So, salokya, samipya, and then we have sayujya. You are always joined with him. We are always a part of that God. And then the very final, you can say, liberation is sayujya. That is, you get yoked to that divinity. For these dualistic schools, identity is not a problem. It's saying you have to identify yourself with your soul, and that soul is already identified with God. That's it. So what separates us? What separates us is nothing but old karma, which has been rising from the sense of alienation, sense of separateness. If that is eradicated, well and good. So the first thing they do is just give you the karma yoga. Like we here say karma yoga day, come and work. So it attenuates our ego, a sense of separateness. So we become one with the others. And swagata, that is, we have a mango tree, and the different parts of the mango tree, like we have the branches and twigs and leaves and fruits and flowers and stems, all these things, but they are part of one whole. So this is the illustration given by the qualified non-dualist, the Vishishta Advaita. They say that, oh, you are already part of the whole. Where is the separation? You are part of the whole, like the different parts of a tree, or different parts of the body, or different cells of the body. So one has just to realize oneself as being part of the divine. And that is easy. Again, why easy? So they again bring out the doctrine of karma. They're saying good deeds expands one's soul, and bad deeds contracts the soul. That is, contracts the knowledge. And the more you have these kind of, the latter, the bad deeds, you feel contracted. And actually it so happens. A person who is given to doing good, that person feels his mind and feels his heart always expansive. And the moment you keep on doing something, suppose you tell a lie and see how it disturbs your mind and how you try to avoid people's eyes and stares and how you want to avoid people. That's what actually happens. So they say, you keep on doing good, and then it expands, your heart expands, your soul expands, your knowledge expands. And as it expands, you will understand that you are part of the whole. There is no going and coming and nothing. You will stay where you are, always as a part of the divine. Why? Because you are divine. So this is the Vishishtadvaita, the Swagata Beda. Well, then we have existential alienation. So much for ontological alienation, so existential alienation. Apart from this day-to-day problems of us, there are hundreds of problems. You get up in the morning and you wonder why do you have to get up and do all this stupid work and the stupid same old conversations, same old people, same old habits, and you get disgusted. Let's go back to sleep. But you drag yourself out. These are, minor existential problems. Things like death, poverty, and disease, and angst, and ennui. All these things are major existential problems. So these existential philosophers, they say that every person has a capacity to introspect, self-introspection. And when we introspect, we feel that, yes, we are individuals. They don't use the word self or soul. They say just, we exist. Yeah, that's a good thing. So this existence is now enmeshed with this world. The problem is, they say this individuality, this existence, is free. Yeah, you have the German philosophers and French philosophers say, you are actually free. So much, so free? Yes, and you have a free choice. And you choose something. But they say the world is so unpredictable. existence is so unpredictable that you make a choice and most of the time your choice is all wrong. But you've got to take responsibility for that. So there's always a dread, existential dread. You have an existential freedom, but you have an existential dread. What will be the outcome? So these things, this existential, you can say, dread, the freedom of choice, and you can see the responsibilities are part of that philosophy. It is actually, some of these existential philosophers, they were theologians, philosophers of course, and they tried to make sense of what is existence. But for them, existence was only body and mind. They couldn't go too deep inside. And there's nothing new. Buddhism was an old existential philosophy. They too never used the word self or soul. Say nothing. So what happened? You are nothing. Nothing? Yeah, you'll go into nothing. What? That was in the void, in the shunyata. Or you are nothing but a stream of consciousness, constantly flickering and flickering. Where it ends, no one knows. And if you can get into nirvana, it flickers off. Then what? Everything is over. So some of these arguments mimic the old Buddhistic arguments. And we have seen how Vedanta dismissed all these existential arguments. However, the Bhagavad Gita talks about Uddhared Atmanatmanam Atnatmanam Avasadayet. One has to lift oneself by your own self. For the self is a friend of one, and the self is also the foe of one. So Bandhuratma and Shatruatma. So it also speaks of lifting oneself. There are two selves, and one has to lift oneself gradually. So we have this kind of alienation here. The two selves, one has to slowly lift oneself and become integrated. Of course, in the Bhagavad Gita and all the other scriptures, we are alienated from the inner soul. The real soul, real individual soul is called a Pratyagatman or Antaryami, the inner controller or inner dweller, or the inmost self, Pratyag Atman. So what separates us? Thoughts about separation. And then they clump together and they become a kind of personality. So we are always kind of isolated from our real self. The real self is not just the ego. The ego is a kind of a separated individuality. One has to come back gradually towards the Pratyagatman. And until the Pratyagatman, the inner self, inmost self, is not realized, we cannot realize the Supreme Self. So that is the reason why they say, first one has to integrate oneself and go through the process of de-alienation, identify yourself with that inner self, the Pratyagatman, and then on the next stage is you integrate your inner self with the Supreme Self. Okay. Psychological alienation. Let's come to the third. It's not we know how we are separated first from ourselves, and that brings a separation from others. So it's a twofold alienation. We are separated from our own ego. The ego itself, even in normal people, it's a kind of a very large branching tree. It has different levels. The ego has different levels, and the fantasy self, and then we have the different self-images, and the dream self, and the workaday self, all these various things. A person is different in while working and is different at home or with the friends or something like that. So it's a kind of a fragmented, you can say, personality. And moreover, we say, love thy neighbor as thyself. Well, if you don't know yourself, you will not be able to love the neighbors. Moreover, somehow we have taken a distaste for ourselves. Oh, I have so many ideals and so many levels of achievement, I have not achieved anything. And that makes me alienated from the ego. The ego, as I say, we are branching out. And secondly, it is most of our waking life is guided by our subconscious mind. All these impressions that come down to us, they become they settle down into a layer after layer after layer comes and settle down. We work through this because we want to first conserve energy. We want to go through the process of the least resistance to work. So we are used to a kind of a track and we go according to that track. So it is the subconscious images, subconscious impressions that are actually guiding us. And as we know, the more we are subject to this, the more things are there which we have created. Fears and phobias, as you call it, phobias, irrational. There is a kind of suppression and repression of those things. So they emerge out, and this ego, the individuality, gets confused. First, it does not want to face the emotional challenges. It's extremely difficult to become emotionally integrated when we have the full play of the ego going on. So we have something called the Supreme Self here, and then we have something called the Pratyagatman, the inner self here, and then we have something called the ego here, and then we have the mind, which is full of good and bad impressions, and then we have society outside. It's a gradual disentanglement, you can say, we've got to do with things around us, from the mind, from the ego, come down to the Pratyagatman, the inmost self, and then, so it's a kind of a journey. We have, Swamiji speaks, I remember one time, I was very young, and I seen a quotation of Swami Vivekananda, and a huge picture, unity in variety is a plan of creation. And it struck me like somebody hit me with a hammer. And I just stood there and I kept on watching it. And that's what it is, actually. Unity in variety is a plan of creation. When we look at life, life actually integrates us. Wherever there's life, we seek life. Even in those, we are trying to seek those aliens, seek extraterrestrial life. We are seeking life here also. Everywhere you find life. You're not attracted to something dead. In fact, it repulses you. So it is life that is actually a great integrating factor. And we need to make that life force dominant. If you don't feel harmony with another life, you are alienated. Yeah. And then on the little lower level, physical bodies, they are almost all one. There's hardly any difference in you can say, the materials. Physically, we are all one. We are one with the sun, the moon, and the stars, and we are one with all this whole universe. Where is the idea of separation is coming? Even if you look at it from the genetic standpoint, all life is based on that same genetic plan. And we've got a whole history written in our genes. So here we are, there. There's no difference between you and the banana. Here. If it was, you wouldn't be able to eat it. Somehow life integrates. Everything that you ingest, everything that you see and think and talk, this life here can integrate. It has a vast capacity. And integration means unification. It wants to unify. So there's one force that pravritti is trying to disperse us, and the life force is trying to pull us back inside. One time Swami Satyamayananda, he was in Puri. It's a very special place of pilgrimage for the Vaishnavas. So he felt himself dying. So he said, let's watch what happens. That is, after he had returned to India from San Francisco. Then he saw two forces, one trying to pull him away, another force trying to draw him back. And he's saying, let's watch who wins. And the force which was inside drew him back. Of course, he had a vision of Swami Vivekananda. Hey, Haribhai, what's this? Come, get up. And there it was. He got a new lease of life. So it's like that. We are being drawn out, at the same time we are being pulled inside. That unification, disunification. Who wins? Unification wins. Why? Because it has thrown up all this variety of life. It would not have been possible at all to have this life anywhere, either here or somewhere else. And then we have something higher. Love. Love unifies. And that's the basic human, you can say, sentiment, need, the very foundation of human life is love. Where did love disintegrate? Well, there are stories that love separates. But when love is narrowed down, it will separate people. Give it a full play, and you'll find love unifying people. You will not see any differences there. It's just love. And then it really makes you broaden. Of course, you become identified with the object of love, and then one object and two objects and three objects keeps on increasing. And as love increases, so does bliss increases. If there is no bliss in love, there is not love. There's something else masquerading as love. So we have. Then we come to the mind, a higher category. Well, in Vedanta, there is one mind, the cosmic mind. What about my mind? You? Well, you are just a part of that cosmic mind. So, when we are already unified on the level of the mind, the basic level, and we are all parts of that one cosmic mind, so we should feel happy and not feel alienated. And then, of course, when we come down to the level of the soul, of the universal soul is one. So why should we feel alienated here? So there's one, and we are parts of that one. To not to take it literally parts, Vedanta says you are literally that whole. There's a whole ocean in that drop of water. So, and we say, and you either take that drop of water seriously, that is yourself seriously, that your existence is water, and you have existed there in that ocean. You have emerged out from the ocean. You've got to go back to the ocean. There is no other path. Nanya panta vidyate. There is no other path. Well, I'll leave you with this. We need to see where exactly we are taking a misstep, where exactly we are feeling alienated, and what we need to do. But of course, that's throwing the gauntlet at you. Now you do what you want. I would rather end this talk with mother's last message to all of her children. She says, if you want peace, do not find fault with others, because fault finding alienates you. Rather see your own faults. See how far you're alienated. Saying, learn to make the whole world your own, my child. No one is a stranger. No one is a stranger, my child. The whole world is your own. This is the message that we need today, more than ever, because as we are getting more and more progressive, we feel we are getting more and more small. We feel small. And that idea of smallness, that littleness, I'm so fragile, I am a non-entity, I have a meaningless life, that will go away. And then we will be energized with these thoughts. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ram Krishna Arpanamastu.